The world is full of forgotten adventure games, so why would you need to care about this one? Keep on watching to find out why. Hello everyone and welcome to Retro Games in Rally English. My name is Juho Kuorikoski, I'm a Finnish journalist and a non-fiction author, and I'm here to talk about old games in my very Finnish English. In this episode I will be talking about a Finnish point-and-click adventure game which is almost as rare as the Loch Ness Monster. There weren't that many adventure games made here in Finland, so Alien Incident, or Muukalaisten yö as the title goes in Finnish, is a rare breed indeed. This game is somewhat of a rare jewel, or at least a hefty lump of mountain crystal. The game is no means a classic of the genre, but nevertheless it still deserves some attention, as it is a solid point-and-click adventure game. So, let's take a closer look on how we Finns do adventure games.
Alien Incident was released in 1996 for international market by GameTech and in Finland by Taptronics. The game was developed by Housemarque, a company more familiar with arcade-themed games. The game was released in two separate versions. Finnish release was titled Muukalaisten yö, which roughly translates to English as Alien Incident, which became the name of the international edition. Alien Incident is the second title released by Housemarque, Super Stardust being the first. The game is also the only adventure game produced by Housemarque. Both of these titles were released by GameTech. Heavily inspired by movies like Back to the Future and Star Wars, Alien Incident is a classic point-and-click adventure game in every sense of the word. The game starts when a mad scientist is testing out his newest invention, a black hole spawner. As usual, things go sideways and soon there's an alien spaceship on Earth's orbit and an energy being titled The Entity is hiding somewhere. The aliens kidnap the scientist and it's up to his nephew, Benjamin Richards, to save the day, his uncle and Earth.
Making an adventure game isn't easy, especially when you're trying to make a good one. Many have tried, but many have failed, as the majority of game design principles of a good adventure game are rooted deep in the game mechanics. Housemarque did a very good job with Alien Incident, and they were able to pull this off with their first go. Alien Incident has all the traits of a good adventure game, and it's only a touch away from being excellent.
As a point-and-click game, Alien Incident offers few surprises. You advance the story by talking to people, gathering items and solving puzzles. The core gameplay is well crafted as puzzles are logical and dialogue is well written. The game was released in Finnish and in English. For the sake of convenience, I'm playing the English version. Alien Incident fumbles a bit with grammar, but the Finnish version has a lot more issues with spelling. Sloppy proofreading in a commercial product is a shame. And before someone writes a comment, my grammar isn't perfect either, but you don't have to pay a dime to consume the content I've provided. As I mentioned, the core gameplay works like a charm. In this regard, the spelling errors are just a minor nuisance. In terms of game design, Housemarque has drawn inspiration from the right place, as the design principles of LucasArts are deeply rooted in Alien Incident. Every puzzle is constructed with care and they are dictated by logic, not logistics. The overall structure of the game consists of one puzzle after another, so in this regard the game design differs from the LucasArts formula. I would have preferred a structure with multiple parallel puzzles, but thankfully the overall puzzle design is so good that the straight line from one puzzle to another doesn't get annoying. There aren't that many screens, but that's only a good thing. The structure is compact and wandering around figuring out what to do next is minimized. In terms of screens, in adventure games, less is more. There is, however, one exception. Do you wanna know what is the lowest possible way to add content to an adventure game? A maze! This is definitely the low point of the game, but thank God the maze isn't cryptic or long. It's still annoying and unnecessary piece of gameplay, the only major dent in the game design. In terms of audio visuals, the game has aged relatively well. It's right on par with other games of the era, as well as the majority of modern neo-retro adventure games. The score composed by Jonne Valtonen has aged with grace, and it suits the game. Smooth animations are a joy to watch, and the only critique regarding the graphics is the somewhat bland main character. Ben is reminiscent of Marty McFly, but the hero in Alien Incident is no Guybrush Threepwood. Thankfully Ben is immortal as his LucasArts counterparts. One nifty addition to usability is autosave, which is nowadays considered to be as normal as seatbelts in a car. In 1990s this wasn't the case. If you hadn't saved your game and power went out, and this happened quite often in my childhood, you'd had to backtrack quite a bit if you'd forgot to save. The game is lighthearted in the vein of LucasArts titles, and the jokes score some laughs even today. With some tuning and extra polish, Alien Incident could have been right on par with LucasArts titles. It's almost as good, but unfortunately not just there.
The development of Alien Incident started in 1992 and the game took 3 years to complete. For many developers at Housemarque, Alien Incident was the first game project they were involved in. Alien Incident is a window to the early days of Finnish game industry, as it was first an interesting idea that was then developed to a game. Instead of branding and considering a genre to identify with, things were done just because they seemed interesting.
Originally Alien Incident was titled Leocadian, but later the name was changed to something more descriptive. The game is heavily influenced by LucasArts' adventure games, which were, according to the developers, the starting point for the game development. LucasArts had gained worldwide fame with its extensive adventure game library, so the developers decided that this was a good starting point for an adventure game of their own. Housemarque hadn't established itself as an arcade game studio, so there was room to experiment. Alien Incident is a brainchild of two Housemarque employees, Mikko Miettinen and Petteri Petsku Putkonen. The two were heavily inspired by the games of LucasArts, The Secret of Monkey Island in particular, so they decided to develop an adventure game of their own. Developing a commercial adventure game had been a long-time ambition for Mikko Miettinen. Alien Incident was heavily rooted in his hobby adventure game projects, which were, according to him, very reminiscent of Sierra Space Quest franchise. When Miettinen saw an article about Bloodhouse, a Finnish game studio, in news article of a Finnish games magazine, he called them and presented an idea for an adventure game he was working on. This idea evolved to Alien Incident and Miettinen was hired to work at Housemarque. Originally Alien Incident had a text parser similar to Sierra's adventure games from the 80s. The commands were written in sentences containing a verb and a noun. Instead of mouse, everything was done with keyboard. During the development this idea was abandoned. Point-and-click interface was considered to be more intuitive and modern. Games released by LucasArts also affected in favor of the mouse-operated user interface. The user interface selected for Alien Incident is indeed quite similar to the games where the inspiration stemmed from. Alien Incident was made and released during a time period where Finnish game development was at an infant stage. According to Miettinen, the development process was somewhat garage-based. Gifted enthusiasts were working with projects they found interesting. Games were done in very small teams, and the driving force for making them was to create something interesting. The way games were made was totally different, as many parts of the process were very labor-intensive. For example, drawing and animating graphics was a chore when compared to the way things are done today. Instead of algorithms and specific tools made for animation, every frame had to be drawn by hand. Then it was colored, and lastly all jagged lines were removed by altering the line colorization in order to produce smooth and naturally angled lines. This is a piece of cake for a modern animation and graphics tools, but in the early 90s this had to be done manually, pixel by pixel. Also in the terms of project funding, things were very different in the 1990s. Project costs came from the company's own pockets and the payment was received when and if a publisher was willing to release a game. GameTech agreed to publish the game and left its own, quite literal stamp on Alien Incident. The ghost scene on the box of the international release was added by GameTech, and rumors say that this Casper-like ghost was done by one of the relatives of GameTech's executives. It looks stupid and out of place, but luckily it doesn't affect the game itself. Alien Incident was released in a time period when adventure games as a genre started to fade away. Housemarque's adventure game debut has a special place in the history of Finnish game industry, as it portrays quite well the attitude of the 90s. The product wasn't thought in the perspective of sales and revenue. If the idea was interesting enough, it made itself into a game. That's something that the game industry in whole could use today. When games became mainstream, this also meant that they became business. When inspiration is pitted against money, there's no question who's triumphant.
It's a shame that Housemarque never made a sequel for Alien Incident or other adventure games, as they clearly had talent for them. Alien Incident would have provided a good base to build upon. While Maniac Mansion and Zack McCracken are excellent games, they function more as a prototypes of the classic LucasArts formula. With Alien Incident, Housemarque could have followed the same path. But in 1996, the heyday of classic adventure games was beginning to fade, and Housemarque decided to concentrate on other genres. Unfortunately, Alien Incident isn't available in any digital platforms. The game would make a fine addition to GOG's game library. The game isn't supported on ScumVM, but running it on DOSBox is relatively easy. If point-and-click adventure games are your thing and you haven't played Alien Incident, try finding it somewhere. Especially if you are a fellow LucasArts fan. If anyone at Housemarque is watching this, I ask kindly that would it be possible to get this game released on digital platforms such as Steam and GOG. In the meantime, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But as always, the race was hard and tire was bad. Until next time, Kuorikoski out.